and the subject is garbage. Most of us, I would say all of us, when we put our containers out at the curb, think that it goes into a dump. A dump being not such a nice name for a landfill. We have not had a landfill in the town of Smithtown since 1991. Now, what did we have to do to get rid of the solid waste that all of us generate? We went into partnership with the town of Huntington, which was in the process of building a plant which would consume the waste and turn it into energy. In fact, we don't call it a garbage plant, we call it a resource recovery plant. And the resource that's recovered is electricity and other items that may have been thrown into the waste stream, like metal or cans and that type of matter.
Garbage collection and disposal in the town of Smithtown is one of our major functions, involving significant expenditures and some very advanced technology. And where we are today is sitting inside of the town's resource recovery facility, where we bring the garbage that everyone puts out at the curb after separating out their materials for recycling. We bring the rest here. And it's processed in a very sophisticated way to generate electricity, to recover still more recyclable material, and monitored in such a way as to prevent the pollution of the atmosphere. And that's what we're going to see today, is this very advanced, technologically advanced method of managing garbage and preventing harm to the environment. The plant operates most efficiently in a number of ways, not the least of which is financially, when it's at capacity. So when the amount of waste from the two towns falls off, we do a number of things to keep the plant running. One is that sometimes we'll take waste from another town that is experiencing problems, and we've taken waste from other Long Island towns here to make sure that the plant operates most efficiently on an economic and environmental basis. And then if we don't have waste from another town to top off the plant, we do open it up commercially, and we'll take spot waste from other generators. So that what you really have here is this plant takes care of 116,000 tons of trash just from the town of Smithtown. They take a greater amount of trash for the town of Huntington. And then there's additional waste to top off the loads.
And that's annual.
That's annual.
So what exactly are you looking for?
I'm looking for anything that has to do with violations of town code that we would see during inspection. Then I would, summons them for it, photograph it, summons it, and that. And looking over the garbage, what I'm looking for to see is where the garbage came from. Is it consistent with his statement and everything else, to make sure that we're not getting or receiving garbage from outside the district that does not belong here.
What you're looking at now is one of the 22 refuse trucks that serve the residents of the town of Smithtown. These 22 trucks are operated by 4 different private firms operating under contract to the town, and they pick up your trash on behalf of the town. These trucks run exclusively on compressed natural gas rather than diesel fuel, and it's one more environmental program that the town has implemented to reduce the environmental impacts of our solid waste operation.
Tom, thank you for taking the time to give us a demonstration of what goes on here. I noticed that when the crane operator was lowering the claw, that he picked up the waste, pulled it up, dropped it again. Why is he doing that?
Right, we call that fluffing, and basically it's to make sure that we don't have any bulky items, for instance, boilers or engine blocks and things like that. We want to be able to pick out the stuff that's going to hurt us in the operation. And basically here at the Huntington facility, we process in excess of 320,000 tons of waste each year. The waste first comes onto a tipping floor, where it's dropped onto the floor and inspected by a tipping floor inspector. Once we deem it acceptable, that waste is pushed into the refuse pit. We have a crane here that will pick up the waste and ultimately charge this hopper, which is the beginning part of the burn process. By gravity, the waste falls down to a location where it meets large hydraulic pistons that push the waste in based on our needs. If we want to make more steam, we'll push it in faster. We also have a unique control of air flow underneath. It gets forced underneath the grates
and will be adjusted as our needs. As an example, if it's raining out, we will need more air in this front end section to dry out the fuel from the excess moisture.
We frequently are contacted by residents who are concerned that perhaps they threw something out inappropriately and they'd like the opportunity to look for it.
Like an engagement ring.
Yes, when you see the volume of waste we're talking about here, you see the impossibility of finding something like that. Each truck brings in between 12 and 14 tons alone, and there's between 120 and 140 of them every day, and they fill that pit. It's just enormous. You can't find things after they've reached that pit.
You're saying that it's 30 feet deep?
Yes.
Which is 30 times more than I can see from ground level.
That's correct.
Good. Where will we go next, Tom?
We're going to go down and see the fire and actually the garbage burning.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, Tom, I guess we're below the hoppers that got the garbage fed to them?
That's correct. Basically, you saw the crane operator open up the grapple and drop the garbage. Now it's going to flow down from this location and be pushed into the furnace with these big hydraulic pistons. That's where the beginning of the combustion process happens. The garbage is actually burning in excess of 2,200 degrees.
2,200 degrees?
Yes.
The heat from the combustion of the garbage heats up water tubes in the exterior of the boiler, making steam. And then the steam, in turn, turns a generator. Those generators operate 24/7, 365 days a year, and generate enough electricity to power between 15,000 and 18,000 homes continuously. The revenue from the sale of electricity to LIPA is returned to the town. The town then uses that revenue to defray its cost of paying Covanta to operate the plant.
And the beauty part of this, Mr. Vecchio, is that we do this with renewable energy. We're not taking any fossil fuel out of the ground. This is all renewable energy. So it's really a wonderful process. Right now we're at the ash pit. So what I showed you earlier was the garbage actually burning. Now what's left is an ash residue that we'll ultimately send to a landfill. In that ash is also contained some metal. So this part of the process actually shows where we recycle the metal and we separate the larger size metal from the smaller size. Housed in here is also an ash pit, and you'll see that. The crane behind me is actually picking up the ash and loading it onto a vibrating system, which will ultimately separate out the metal from the ash.
Russell, yesterday you told me that there was an enormous amount of metal that's generated and picked up by magnet from the plant?
Yes, that's correct. This plant, just last year alone, recovered 4,700 tons of metal from the ash before we disposed of the ash. And that's material that we would hope that residents might recycle before it ever got to the plant, but for those who forget and make mistakes, we do have in place a method right here to capture metal and make sure that it's recycled and not wasted. And we've been somewhat successful at that. Smithtown residents are very good at recycling. Last year, in the town of Smithtown, we had a 26% recycling rate. That means 26% of the waste that was generated was recycled, which is pretty good by Long Island standards.
Okay.
And the metal and ash is conveyed through a belt conveyor to the top of this building where it meets a magnet. And that magnet pulls out all the ferrous metal and separates the ash from the metal for ultimate disposal.
Where are we now, Tom?
Right now we're at the process. I just showed you where the ash was being loaded out onto some vibrating conveyors. Now, in order for us to complete the cycle, the ash travels on a belt conveyor along with the metal that's contained in the ash. And from there, we bring it up to the top of this building here, and where it meets a large magnet. That magnet will separate out the ferrous metal from the ash. So when we show you there later, you'll see two containers. One is where the ash is disposed of, and then there's a recycling container where the metal is disposed of. We're reducing the volume of garbage by 90%. And so now only 10% of the volume of garbage that came in, it has to be landfill. We hope that someday, Mr. Vecchio, to actually have a total recycling program where the ash would actually be able to be used in road base and maybe building cinder blocks and that kind of thing. And we hope to get there someday.
Okay. Now, I think I know this fact. Tell me if I'm wrong. Each household generates an average of 1.5 tons of waste every year.
Yes, and those are Smithtown numbers. Each household generates about 1.5 tons of waste. And one of the things that our residents might find interesting is that is a rate that is a little bit higher than the national average. Right here on Long Island, not Smithtown alone, but throughout Long Island, we are one of the greater generators of waste nationwide.
Okay, Tom, we're now in Russell. We're in a what appears to me to be a control room, and I suspect it's controlling what's happening in the plant and some other things. Now, how do we know that these emissions that go up the stack, which I've said earlier, that far exceed the requirements of the federal government in terms of emission control?
That's true.
And I think people would like to know that the federal government sets certain standards, and this plant is routinely 60 to 80% below the limit set by the federal government. In other words, less than half the amount that the federal government says could be emitted is emitted. So
that's pretty impressive. So those of us who are environmentally conscious have no fear that stuff we put out at the curb on Monday and Friday or Tuesday and Thursday is going to get consumed in a very safe environmental way.
And the plant has a performance level that actually is among the best in the nation.
Okay, that's great. Now, what about electricity? How do you monitor the amount of electricity?
Right here we have a distribution panel that shows that the steam that we created from burning the garbage then turns a turbine generator, and that electricity is monitored here. If you look up, you'll see a meter right here.
Which dial is that?
That's this one here. It actually shows how much electricity we're actually generating.
So do you attempt to keep it at 27 megawatts all the time?
Yes, we do. We talked earlier about the plant runs most efficient when it's full of garbage, running flat out, and that's what we do here. We run as hard as we possibly can, make as much electricity so that it helps offset the taxpayers in the disposal
Now,
fees.
if it falls below that 27 megawatts?
Well, basically our system, this sophisticated control room, it actually allows us to, just like your automobile, to add more fuel that we can actually bring that back to the most maximum efficiency.
And I assume that we're very successful at doing that. So thank you for watching, and thank you both for, thank you, Tom, for a great tour.